But for all of human history, we've been waiting for him. It begins earlier than you think, in fact, if you really go back to Genesis chapter 3, when that promise is made that he will certainly bruise your heel, but your foot will crush his head. That is messianic promise that they had been waiting for all that time. Not only had they been waiting, but the enemy had been waiting. And as we recognize, when it came time to actually see this conflict between Cain and Abel, he wasn't merely trying to kill Abel. He was trying to destroy the seed. He was trying to destroy that potential. He was trying to keep the promise from coming to pass. The awesome thing that we know is that when God makes a promise, it always comes to pass. But that doesn't stop the enemy from trying to stop the promise from coming to pass in your life. And so over the course of years and of history, and you'll see, and I don't want to go through the entire text because then I'll be long and you'll talk about me. But you see people emerge that every time there's someone with an anointing of deliverance on their lives, the enemy comes and tries to destroy them before they even recognize who they are. Because your Bible tells us in the book of Exodus that people have been praying for a deliverer. God says, surely I have heard the affliction of my people. I've heard their cry, and I'm come down to deliver them. And he comes through Moses. Now, Moses is still a baby. Moses does not know his assignment. Moses does not know that he's a prophet. Moses does not know even where he is. But all that we know is that there comes an attack, and the devil will wipe out an entire generation just to ensure the promise doesn't come to pass. And so when there's an anointing of deliverance on your life, when there's an anointing for you, not only for your own salvation, but for the salvation of others, the enemy recognizes and puts a target upon your back. And so what happens is that this same Moses, who's only a baby, it's amazing. What is it about a baby that can be so intimidating that it causes the enemy to release genocide? What is it that's so powerful about this one young man that a whole generation could be impacted? Babies upon babies being murdered and killed. What's so impactful about the young people in this generation? Who's in this generation such that the enemy is releasing the amount of onslaught and attack that he is? And if we are blind, we'll simply see the activity of the enemy. But if we're prophetic, we'll ask God, Lord, open our eyes to see the treasure that you're hiding in earthen vessels. The most important thing that I think in the story of Moses, and I really do need to press along, is that Moses' mother recognizes something different and special and peculiar about her child and decides to take on the task of protecting him in the midst of a generation that was being overtaken. And I think that all of us share that same responsibility, whether it be biological children or children that are not, that we have a responsibility of asking God, who have you anointed me to protect in this generation? If you anointed me to protect in this generation. So when Jesus is born, we are not surprised that Herod releases the decree. Once again, we've got to wipe out all the children. Because he recognizes that in wiping out the children, he's hopeful to destroy the promise. They've been waiting for a long time. They've been waiting, your Bible expositors know, for 42 generations they've been waiting. They waited for 3 groups of 14, right? 14 generations, 3 times. But in the third iteration, Christ came. Christ came, Messiah came. They didn't fully understand who Messiah was. We have a lot of Christianese that we impose upon the Jewish text that they do not recognize. And we do have to be mindful of that when we witness the people that are of the Hebrew tradition. That many of the texts that we ascribe to Messianic, they didn't even recognize. Because in many ways, the prophecy was closed to them. And so when we talk about many of the scriptures that we say are Messianic scriptures, many times they'll say, oh, no, that wasn't about the Messiah. Say, oh, yes, this was about him. But they knew a couple of things about him, and most importantly, they knew that the way that society was now was not the way that society would be when Messiah came. They knew that somehow the hand of the oppressor would be lifted off of the oppressed people. And so in many fashions, they looked back to Moses and saw that just as Moses was able to deliver the Hebrews when they were in captivity under the Egyptians, that God would send yet another deliverer. Just like he sent Samson to deliver them from the Philistines, God would send a deliverer that would break them free of Roman oppression. The trouble, though, is what happens when God shows up in clothing that you're not expecting.
Right.
They looked for a deliverer, but this wasn't quite the way they had really expected him. And I believe the disciples struggled with that as well. And I think it's important for us in the 21st century group of disciples, and I'm really becoming very fond of the term disciple. I like that term a lot. I think we need to get back to that understanding of being disciples. I haven't gotten this thing all figured out, but that's good because disciples are learners. I'm learning this thing, and if we can all see ourselves in the journey trying to learn this thing, and Jesus trying to give them a learning moment. And it says, "Who do men say that I am?" And they have all of these examples, and you hear Elijah, you hear Jeremiah. What they did not know was what was noted in other texts, this is Joseph the carpenter's son. Right? There was a whole lot of scandal around this Jesus character. He was not universally acclaimed as being one that was even worthy of reverence or even of respect. And yet there are some titles that they acclaim to him. Either way, you're really prophetic. We understand that. Elijah, Jeremiah, we give credence to the works that we've seen you do. You're saying some really powerful things. Says, but who do you say I am? And that's a question that was directed to Peter within the context of this text. But I think it bears repeating within the context of the 2017 church. Who do we really say that he is? Who do you say that he is? And so Peter gives back an answer which gives us an understanding of his function, of his title, and of his origin. He says, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah. You're not the son of Joseph, the carpenter, but you're the son of the living God, full of theological impact and truth. Great theological lesson to be learned. And while many of us accept the Christ part and we accept the Son of God part, we don't accept the who part. And this has always been the challenge of the church, because while we will ascribe to God the fact that he is deity, we will tell God, you are Lord, you are God. Oftentimes we're honest, we don't really like who he is. I like that you're God, but I don't like that you're you. Now, we don't use those terminologies. We don't say it that way. But if I go back to our friend Moses, when Moses has disappeared and it's been a while, the first couple of days were good. But when God actually is in communion with Moses and he has stripped them of the only visible representation of himself, they struggle with that. It's not immediate. It happens little by little. And what do they begin to do? They go to Aaron and they say, make us a God that we can see. Because all my life I've grown up with gods that I could see. And I'm not going to be comfortable with God until he makes himself visible in the way that I want to see him. And that's the struggle that we have. Because all of our lives, it's the same thing that happens in marriage. That's why we are really intent on marriage counseling, to try to, if you can get people to admit to and be honest about what they expect out of a husband, out of a, not out of a friend, out of a girlfriend. The reason why people can live together for 10 years and then get married and all of a sudden everything falls apart is because they have expectations of a wife or a husband that they never had concerning their special friend. No, really. And then what happens is that you get to the altar and you get married and you expect this magic transition to happen. It's like, well, I always thought that my husband would be like this. Like, why do I just like, yeah, but you weren't a husband then. We don't express it in those words. But that's what happens. We have these expectations, these ideologies that we attach to concepts. And we don't talk to people about these concepts. We don't talk to people about these ideologies, but they exist. And they express themselves usually not in words, but they express themselves in frustrations. And so now I'm angry with you, but I can't tell you why I'm angry with you, because I never really processed the fact that what I really expected from you after we got married was like, we were just friends or whatever. We both cooked. But in my house, my mother always cooked. So now we're married, I thought. Right, we were friends, but marriage, I thought that things would be different. When we were just friends, you hang out with your boy. But my father was always at home in the basement watching TV and fixing everything that went wrong. So what you mean you going out? Well, I've gone for the past 20 years. It's been cool. No. But your husband now. And we bring all of these expectations, not even necessarily bad ones, but they're expectations. And when we come to God, don't you think you don't come to him with expectations? And so when Jesus says who they come with expectations. There were things that I expected about him. And so this is not the first Jesus version we've been through. Right? Right? Let's be honest. Right? It's not the first version of Jesus that we've been through historically. I like to be honest about the text, right? We have a whole book of Maccabees, and there's all these other iterations of people that came, and we thought that it was him. And then we found out that it wasn't him. And so when he comes this time, I know what I'm looking for. And so when Jesus comes and we see him, it's like, okay, I believe this is the one. It's not the first time I've been disappointed, though. But I believe this is the one. 400 years of silence. I believe this is the one. And when he comes, he's talking some weird stuff. I like that he's Messiah. And I believe it because I've seen the stuff they did. There are things about him that really force me to believe. But there's things about him that really concern me. Like John the Baptist was kind of cool because, John the Baptist, he comes, he's like, wow, he's really against these guys. And I feel as though if John the Baptist was like Messiah, oh my gosh, Romans would be running scared. I mean, the guy is just vicious. And so if that's his cousin, born only 6 months earlier, I know this Jesus guy, he's going to bring it. John, are you him? I hope you're him. No, I'm not him. I had some expectations about who he would be. All of us, particularly born in the 20th century, we end up with these, now 21st century, I'm old. We got some expectations. There are some TV evangelists that have created some expectations for us. And I've got to be mindful that I'm constantly, I'm always trying to do stuff and be mindful, and I'm taking pictures of sunrises and stuff, etc. Because although God has blessed me with this, what I'm cognizant of is the fact that God does not owe me this. No matter how many generations of preachers have been trying to tell us that. And so my wife knows what I said. And so I try to appreciate what I have now, such that if the time ever comes that I don't have it, I can say, God, when I had it, I thanked you for it. Because too often we've allowed the God of materialism to masquerade as Jesus. And then when Jesus doesn't show up and do the stuff, then we're mad at him. But you need to be mad at the preacher that lied to you and told you that Jesus was the genie in the bottle. But you don't get mad at him. You get mad at him. And so we set up whole systems of exploitation that rob you of your time, talents, and resources, selling to you an idol God under the name Jesus. One quick test I like to tell people, and it's something I tell myself all the time too. I don't tell anything that I don't live through. If the God that you serve always agrees with you, and he likes all the people you like, and he dislikes all the people you don't like, there's a very high probability, almost guaranteed, that it's not God that you're interacting with. You have created a God in your own image. If the God that you serve wants you to have all the stuff that you want, because the truth of the matter is that me and God end up with issues. Because a lot of times, because we're very different, because his thoughts are not my thoughts. I try to help him out and give him my thoughts. He doesn't want them because he thinks his thoughts are higher than my thoughts. Who would have thought? And so the God that you serve always wants you to have the stuff that you want. Very high probability. Because what happens is that when you encounter God, you start finding out that some of the stuff you want, he don't want you to have. And you've got to settle within yourself that even if we disagree, God, you're still God. And if one of us is wrong, it's got to be me. And I don't get to reshape God. And I don't get to change God. And I don't get to mold God in my own image, even when I think I'm acting in God's best interest. Because certainly I know better than God does. We don't say it in those words, but we live it in our actions. Does this make sense to anybody, or is this just me that has issues? It's hard to worship God. No, it takes work to worship God. Worshiping God is not singing slow songs. Songs are good because songs actually open gateways to the heart. That's a nice thing. Songs can help you position the heart in ways that other things cannot. That's why we utilize the tool of song. Making melody with your heart is success. That's why we utilize the tool of song. But don't mistake song with worship. Because worship has to do with how I value myself in relation to Him. And as long as I think that me and God are equals, I can never worship. So how much do I value my thoughts? How much do I value God's thoughts? How much do I value God's goals? How much do I value my goals? And if my goals and my thoughts and my aims and my aspirations and my whatever else that you fill the blank in is more important than God's, that's where your worship is. Because worship is how much you value something. And the problem is that if I'm very honest in my life, there are many times that I valued what I wanted more than I valued what God wanted. I'm like, God, you can wait. I'm going to do this right now. Because any breach in our relationship with God is ultimately a breach in worship. All these things will I give to you if you just bow down and worship me. He ain't say sing me no slow song. He ain't say sing me a love song and put the word Jesus in it. No, but what he wanted was to be valued. I want you, Jesus, to value all this stuff more than you value your mission. I want you to value all of this more than you value the plan. I want you to value the result more than you value the process that God has ordained to give you the result. And that's why you be very careful in our preaching of Christ, because sometimes we like to preach a passionless Christ. Passion being the old school definition of passion, not passion, but passion of suffering. We like to preach a passionless Christ. We like to preach a salvation that involves no blood and no cross. And because we don't value blood and cross, we bring about Christians who don't value blood and cross, and so they're not willing to suffer with Him. But if you're not willing to suffer, then you cannot reign. And without a crucifixion, there is no resurrection. And if Christ be not raised from the dead, our whole religion, our whole faith is utterly in vain. What Peter offers, the reason why he will get rebuked so strongly in just a couple verses from this is because although he acknowledged his position, although he recognized his origin, he did not respect his identity. And many of us, we respect God's position, but we don't like his identity. What do I mean by that? We don't like, what is personality? The way that you behaviorally respond to stimuli. That's what behavior is, right? How you respond to stimuli. And most of us, we love God because we have to, but we don't like his personality. So we struggle. I say the stuff you don't articulate. I say the stuff that God hears. And he tells me to tell people. We don't like his personality, right? You know, that person's like, come on, let's go do this. Well, wait a minute. I don't like people that tell me to wait. You like them good. But I don't like people that don't respond with urgency when I have, hallelujah, an emergency. Right? Because if I have an emergency and I'm hyped, when I come to you, you need to reflect the hypeness so I know that you care. Because your being troubled shows me that you care. But when I say, carest thou not that we perish, and you're just like, sleeping? I know you, I respect you, but I don't like you very much right now. Because you're not relating to where I am. And so we create these images of God, and we create these formulas. And what we sell to people is, if you complete these 7 steps, God will have emergencies when you have emergencies. If you follow these 7 steps, God will do what you tell him to do. Because ultimately, we don't want a God, we want a puppet. And so we struggle with God's personality because many of us who become successful in life have learned how to manipulate everybody else. And you find out with God, you manipulate parents, manipulate bosses, manipulate everybody, especially powerful people. And then you get to God. Hey, And you cannot, I'm sorry, you cannot manipulate him. Don't invite me to cake. You'll kick me out. You'll kick me out. And you cannot manipulate him. And we get frustrated. Not because anything's wrong with God, but because we find out that we cannot, here it is, we cannot control him. So most of our struggles with God are about the fact that I recognize your position, but I can't control and manipulate you the way I want to. And I know this is true because there are many, many books that are in the Christian market that are designed to do just that. I know because there are many, many messages I hear over and over again that bring God low and bring us up. And suddenly I get confused and I can't remember who God is. And so I'm not troubled by the sovereignty of God because I recognize that he's God. I'm not troubled when God overrules my plans when I properly worship him and recognize who he is. Peter has a problem because Peter, he's like, although we're cool and everything, I still think I got this under control. I know how this is supposed to work. Right. This is the role you're supposed to play. Now, when I told you you're Messiah, Jesus, you have to understand, you're Messiah the way I've defined it in my mind. When I tell you you're Lord, you're Lord in the way that I've defined Jesus. And we struggle when he does not do it according to the specifications that we have created for him, when he does not fit into the mold of what we've created for him. And so Jesus begins to reveal himself to the disciples, most notably to Peter. And certainly Peter, being the smart one that he is, and the vocal one that he is, when he notices that misalignment, he does not just sit there and smile and say, see you next Sunday. What I appreciate about Peter is his honesty. The reason why Peter can advance and many of us don't mature in grace is because we're liars. God can respect your honesty. A liar does not tarry in his presence. And so what happens is that Peter's like, no, Jesus, this does not fit. And so I'm going to do something about it. But what Peter doesn't recognize is that he was not there in the wilderness experience, where 3 times the enemy said, if thou be, what did Peter just call him? Every time there's a declaration, there's a test. The last time the declaration came, it says, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. Then came the test. Matthew 4, Luke chapter 4. Here comes a declaration now from one of the key pillars of the church. The body is now speaking to the head and saying to him, you are the Christ, the Son. You've heard this before. And now here comes the test. Last time was called, you don't have to go through all this here. Make things better on yourself. Now the body is going to the head and saying, you don't have to go through this. I'll die in your place so that you don't have to go through it. The greatest temptation for the church is to actually receive promise without process. And the enemy comes with shortcuts and says, you don't like that guy that makes you wait very much, do you? I've got a way around this to get you what you want without you having to go through the process. And Jesus is cognizant enough to recognize that, you know what? It sounds good to the ears, but it does not sound good to the spirit. Something inside of me is saying, this is the voice of Satan. And you hear the voice of Satan when he's trying to kill this, when he's trying to destroy it, but you don't hear the voice of Satan when he's trying to help you. I don't know if I would have called him Satan. Like, thank you, Peter. I'm glad somebody cares about me. And many of us have walked ourselves right into the arms of Satan just like that. Because of the masquerade of care and concern, we didn't recognize that in truth, they were aborting our purpose, aborting our responsibility, aborting our mission. And next thing you know, had Jesus walked in fulfillment of that, what does he do in year 34? He has a midlife crisis. Like, what am I supposed to do now? What does he do in year 35 and 36? I have no idea. Who am I? make sense to anybody. And so we're challenged when we come to a position where, like, I know that he's God, but I'm not comfortable with who he is. And I think that the church we're in an identity crisis again. But we do a good job of kind of trying to know who we are. And we failed that test miserably. We'll have to go through that again. No, really, we really suck at knowing who we are. We still tell people that your goal in life is to get to heaven. And if you think that's your goal in life, then you've terribly missed Identity 101 in Christianity. And that's okay, because we've taught it to you like that for so long that people didn't really begin to embrace what God was really trying to do. The ascent that occurs in the 7 churches is ultimately he tries to get you from the place of where you are, from your mentality, etc., to finally getting you upon the throne. But that's a whole different conversation. The throne is really the goal for the church. What he's trying to do is make us responsible enough so that we're able to handle the responsibility that comes with being on the throne. And we sit here thinking, he's just trying to control me. He's just trying to tell me what to do. Just like we were in the Garden of Eden. When really he's trying to give you dominion. He's not trying to take it away from you. But you mistake discipline. You mistake boundaries for bondage. And every time God comes along and gives boundaries, this new church now calls it bondage. But as long as you can't be disciplined, you can't be trusted with responsibility. I don't trust anybody that doesn't recognize boundaries. I'm sorry. And so I got, but, oh, can I borrow your car? Do you respect boundaries? If I ride with you and you don't respect any kind of boundary, that median is there for a reason. Those little dotted lines, I promise you, they're there for a reason. Stop signs are there for a reason. And if you can't respect boundaries, I'm sorry, I like you, but you can't be borrowing my car. God is trying to give you a whole lot more than a car. But unless you can prove to him that you respect boundaries, he is not giving loaded guns to amateurs. We say, where's the power in the church? The power is still here. Where are the faithful people that can actually receive what he's trying to give to them? And I recognize what it is. I know that part of it is this whole generation of, it doesn't take all that. And I'm not trying to preach to you a methodology, as it were, but I am trying to preach to you a process that says that for some reason, God tends to trust people that spend time with him. I don't know. It don't take all that tarot. Yeah, but they spent hours praying. I think they got to know them pretty well when they spent that time. Notice in the text that you were reading from this morning, that there were ordinary people in an ordinary place. The thing that was extraordinary was their persistence. And so they recognized, I've got an assignment. That's awesome. Many of us run because we've got assignment. It's like, wow, I've got a purpose in life. Wow, that's awesome. And I've got a promise. That's great. But they do not leave until they spend time in his presence and have actually received the power they need to fulfill what they've been anointed to do. And so he spent that time in prayer getting to know, because I've got to get to know him again. He's got to reopen up the scriptures for me again. Everything I've known, I've got to actually relearn all over again. And for many of us, what God is trying to do in messages like this is to get us to shift that old paradigm of what we thought we knew about him and say, God, I'm open to hearing who you really are. And I'm not saying that who you heard he was before was wrong. Because we operate in a binary fashion. I don't know what that is about us. But everything is very black and white. But God created these other things called colors. And there's a whole lot of colors in between red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And beyond the visible spectrum is ultraviolet and ultra red. And just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So when you try to limit God to black and white, just because it fits within our ability to control people and to define him, you do God a disservice. So I'm not saying that when they said that he was black, that was wrong. When he said he was white, so I'm saying there's a whole lot of other colors in between. And when he revealed himself to you, this is what you saw. But if he turns just a little bit, you'll see something altogether different, which doesn't mean that you were wrong the first time, but it does mean that you don't have it all. And the problem is that we take the little bit that we get and we assume that we have now mastered it. But we're still seeing through a glass darkly. And so what Jesus does in this text is that he shifts a little bit to Peter. And Peter's like, I don't recognize that, Jesus, and I don't accept that. I'm not having this. And Jesus like, no, you've got to have this. You've got to accept this. It's almost like that whole scenario with, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. John 13, right? You've got to embrace all of who he is. You've got to embrace all of who he is. And this is needful, and I need to close. Not only for our own spiritual development, but because the fragment of Jesus that you have accepted might not be the fragment that's needed for the generation you need to reach. Your definition of God might have worked well for you, but there's somebody else that needs a more expansive definition. And you cannot cause them to reject God because they have rejected your little tiny aspect of who you thought God was. And so there's a whole long theological tradition between the Jews and the Samaritans. And it's expressed like this. We know that the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. But if I get stuck in that, the woman at the well will never happen. More important, if I get stuck in that whole city will never be reached. And if I get too caught up in the fact I don't want the woman telling the message, there's a whole lot of people that won't be reached too. I don't like that Samaritan. And so I cannot allow what my glimmer of a vision was to cause me to box God into such an extent that I end up missing God. And I'm concerned that the church is really close to missing him again. We got all the stuff. We got a lot of programs. That's nice. It looks good and sounds good sometimes. But what are we passing? I hope we don't pass on simply an order of services to the next generation. No, really. Y'all need to sit here and learn. What do you teach it? Well, this is how you do service. God forbid. And I don't think, there's nothing wrong with the form. I like liturgy. If you have a liturgy that works a certain type of way, we've always had one. So it's like, that's cool. Even Pentecostalism really has a liturgy. There is a liturgy to it. It's an open one, but it is one. But God forbid that all we pass on to you, I hope we're passing on to you more than just beliefs and ideologies. Hope we're passing on to you more than just thoughts. Because the text is clear in John 15, without me, ye can do nothing. Not without the idea of me, not without the theology, not without the ideologies. We have to pass on to them a person. I'm not always convinced that when I go into church, I'm being introduced to a person. I'm not always convinced when I'm sitting there, I feel somebody sitting next to me. You hear what I'm telling you? I'm not always convinced that when I'm in circles with people, that when we talk about, I'm not really sure that it's him that we're talking about. And that's why I'm not always sure that it's him that's in the midst, even when y'all are dancing and shouting. But when it's legitimately him, he shows up. And you know that he's here because he's like, oh, that's me. And he recognizes himself. God always responds to his own name when it's him that you're calling for. And he'll rescue you from whatever it is that you're going through. He'll rescue you. Just not always in the way that you expect him to. I'm pausing. Never finished, as Bishop used to say. Never finished, but we pause. We pause. There are so many wonderful people here today.